Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Donald Wallenfang. What a delight to be with you on this live stream entitled Aristotle and Edith Stein on Material and Efficient Causality. Taking, again, commentary from my 2017 book, 2017, 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, a study on the theological anthropology of Edith Stein. Into chapter 3, considering causality, working our way toward thinking about the causality of the human soul, the causality of the human soul in itself, in relation to the body, along these different kinds of causality that Aristotle talks about in his physics and his metaphysics. 4 different kinds of causality: formal, final, material, and efficient causality. So we want to think of these different kinds of causality, beginning with those that are more familiar to us, the world of sense perception, of empirical science, natural science, material and efficient causality. So we want to think with Aristotle about these kinds of causality, and also Edith Stein and where she moves the discussion in her own work. So I'm taking, again, some commentary from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, as well as my 2019 book, Metaphysics, a basic introduction and a Christian key. These are really important things to think about when we ask the question, what is being? Why is being? Why is this being or that being? To inquire into the why of a being is to inquire into its origin, its cause. When we ask the question, why is this being? Why does this being exist? We respond in English, because, and we fill in the rest. We respond because we're referring to the cause that is responsible for this or that being's existence. So it's important we don't take the process of change for granted, this relationship between cause and effect for granted. We need to ask it over and over when asking the question, what is being? What is this? What is that? Why are they different? Where do they come from? Where are they going? Thinking about motion, thinking about the laws of physics, the laws of nature. These things are really important for philosophy. And so we need to go back to Aristotle. If we want to understand the soul as the form of the body, eventually, not so much in this presentation, but if we want to work our way to that understanding, what's meant by the soul is the form of the body, we must briefly outline the 4 distinct kinds of causality found in the work of Aristotle. Because one of the basic matrices of finite being is cause and effect. All scientific experimentation presupposes the logical relation and progression of causes to their respective effects. Cause and effect signify the condition for the possibility of becoming. To become is to move from cause to effect. To become is to change. To move from potential being to actual being by the power of already actualized being. All finite beings exist in a state of becoming because they are enmeshed in a perpetual network of cause and effect. Given the importance of cause and effect for all finite existence, one of the most necessary philosophical tasks, even if a relatively preliminary one, is to examine the various types of causes in relation to their respective effects. For the types of causes are certainly multiple and different. So in book 2 of his physics and book 5 of his metaphysics, Aristotle did precisely that. Therein he laid the philosophical groundwork for all ensuing discussion about cause and effect. Even though this material would be included as part of an introductory level course in metaphysics, it is nevertheless essential to reiterate the meaning of Aristotle's classification of causes because they go largely misunderstood or not apprehended at all by people today. The fact is that, at least in the United States, for example, the majority of adolescents graduate from secondary school with virtually no education in philosophy whatsoever, especially in the vital subdiscipline of metaphysics. And likewise, many adults graduate from undergraduate, graduate, doctoral degree programs with little or no intellectual training in philosophy. The vast majority of people would be at a loss if asked about Aristotle's four kinds of causality and their significance for us today. And there's a lot of tragedy about this intellectual famine among us human beings. We don't think very well to the whole, oftentimes. The whole. We think parts pretty well, but we tend not to coordinate and integrate all of the various parts of being of this whole. So, considering Aristotle's four different kinds of causality helps us to think better to the whole. So, the tragedy is overcome when we think along with Aristotle of this intellectual famine, the erosion of the liberal arts in universities today, and all of this. We need to come back to asking these very basic questions about being, which in themselves are so profound. What is being? Why is being? Why is this? Why is that? One cannot responsibly act without first contemplating the cosmos. So let's think about these four different kinds of causality. We're going to start with material causality. Material cause. And we're going to also think about, I always want to write efficient cause with EFFE because it's related to effect, cause and effect. Material cause, efficient cause. And there's two others that I think are far more interesting that Aristotle talks about. Formal cause and final cause. We'll save these for a later time, but today we want to think about material and efficient cause. What does Aristotle mean by these terms? Material cause, efficient cause. If we want to think the whole of being, we have to think both in terms of matter and spirits, matter and form. So the formal causality of a being is designated by the term formal cause, but these are the stuff of natural science, what natural science considers physics, chemistry, biology, and related fields. But these three fundamental natural sciences are thinking about material causality and efficient causality. Both of these things together all the time, and they don't move to think about formal and final causality. This is the stuff for philosophy proper and theology. So let's think about material causality. What do we mean by this? So I'll take some commentary from my 2019 book on metaphysics. The first and most simple kind of cause to understand is material cause. Material cause refers to the matter from which a being derives its own individual matter. So how did this physical body get there, that physical body get there? Where did the matter come from? Pre-existing matter, pre-existing mass energy that underwent a metamorphosis, and now we have this peculiar form of being here. There's a material causality involved in every body. The statue shaped by the sculptor, the mountain shaped by the earthquake or the volcanic eruption, tectonic plate activity, uh, rain, weather, wind, erosion, glaciers, all of these various material causes that we study in natural science. There's we say there's an etiology with all this material being, with all finite being in general. Etiology from a Greek word that means cause. So an etiology, how this thing got here, is because something else was there first. And now this thing is existing. It got its matter from the wooden door, got its matter from the tree. And the tea bag got its matter from the chamomile flower. And all the stuff of human manufacturing and technology, we can trace where did this raw material come from. This is what's meant by material cause. Where's this transfer of matter happening? Where does it originate? But again, it raises a massive philosophical question. Why is there matter rather than not matter? In addition to why is there something rather than nothing? And why is this something material? Why are these atoms, these elements, these molecules, compounds, all these different things? Why all this stuff? Where did it come from? Where did it originate? Why is it here? Why am I part of it? Why is my body part of this matrix of mass energy? Where's all this coming from? So we start with material cause in this overall etiology, especially of finite being, but material being. And yes, we can apply material cause in some ways to finite spiritual being, but for now we really want to think of matter qua matter, matter distinct from spirit. So material cause refers to the matter from which a being derives its own individual matter. Biological reproduction, for example, shows a clear series of beings that derive the matter of their individual bodies from the individual bodies of the parent organisms, as well as the matter obtained through nutrition, hydration, respiration, needed to sustain the life of the offspring. So even what our bodies are doing and all these biological processes in a constant way, we breathe, we drink, we eat, and this sustains our body. Without these natural processes, our bodies disintegrate, and indeed they do when we die, and the body the living body becomes a corpse, we say in English, and the body naturally deteriorates, disintegrates over the course of time. um, because it's lacking the spiritual soul holding it together and all the volition involved to maintain the living body. But at death, the body decomposes, decomposes. And the material causality of the body undergoes a metamorphosis, contributing to uh, new material causes for other kinds of individual material beings. And this is the circle of life. This is the circle of material being, a constant metamorphosis, one form into another, depending on the localized chemical interactions between material beings. And in our case, as human beings, each one of us originates from something from man and something from woman, namely reproductive cells, the gametes of the parental organisms. And upon the fusion of these reproductive cells, our unique individual being is generated. So it's clear this etiology of the human body coming from the paternal and maternal sexual reproductive cells fusing, coming together at this moment, this short process we call conception or fertilization. And we have a new, unique, individualized human organism, human being. But the body of this being, it's clear it came from these reproductive cells of the parent organisms. In the case of stars, the coagulation of interstellar gas and dust particles over the course of millions of years eventually forms an individual star. So in astrophysics, we've learned this at this point in the history of natural science. We learned about the process of how stars are formed, where that matter is coming from that now constitutes this or that individual star, and the process of nuclear fusion that's happening as the star is burning brightly. The aggregate matter of stars has a genealogy traceable through the theories of astrophysics. Matter begets matter when matter is transformed into new forms of matter. Matter does not create itself from nothing. It is merely the substrate that undergoes metamorphosis over the course of time. The material cause of each material being is identical to the matter that preceded the matter that now makes up the body of the individual being. So material cause, it's almost it's a very subtle kind of illusion in a way, because it's not that the matter is itself causing itself. It's not that matter itself is what causes by itself all these different forms of matter. Matter is involved in the metamorphosis, but it is the substrate. It's not even itself the efficient cause of the change. It's involved in the change. And we could say the molecular polarities, they are involved, but we can't give credit to matter alone, to atoms and subatomic particles alone, for bringing about the diversity of material forms that exist, that go in and out of existence. Matter's involved, but we need to think about causality in a much broader way to understand the before and after of an individual material being. There's the matrix of mass energy, but to think about the matter by itself, we just see how it is susceptible to this ongoing metamorphosis, especially at the smallest level, the subatomic particles, the protons, the neutrons, electrons, and particles that make up those ones, quarks, leptons, gauge boson, neutrinos, positrons, all these different kinds of very small particles constantly morphing one into the other. And we see that in this first being, in a series of beings, it had matter that is shared with the second one, with the third one, with the fourth one. And so natural science traces this genealogy of matter in its development and its evolution. But it's watching the continuity of matter through the change, but matter itself is defined by change. And so we still think, well, what holds all of these particles together in this form of human being, or that form of peacock, or that form of a boa constrictor, or that form of the star? What is holding, what's the adhesive of the form of this peculiar kind of being and that peculiar kind of being? And why isn't everything more the same? Why isn't just everything stars? Why are there these diversified kinds of forms like planets and moons, and then all this various elements. And then on planet Earth, such a wide, countless variety of forms, living and non-living. Matter is involved, but it's only one way to think about causality. We want to think about it just a little more to understand this. So Aristotle begins his treatment of causality by defining the goal of his inquiry. Knowledge. Why do we ask about the cause of this or that being? Because we want to know what it is. We want to know the truth about this being and that being and the other one, and the truth about being itself. We want to know. And so, in order to know a thing, and to know a thing, as it's been said, is to know its origin as well as its destiny. But thinking first about origin, to know a being is to know its origin, and to know its origin is to know its cause. This is the stuff of classical metaphysics. So we need to continue to think about the causality of different kinds of individual beings, beginning with the most obvious, measurable, manipulatable, conceivable, objectifiable, material beings. And then we get a pattern to think toward spiritual being, toward the necessary conditions of possibility for there to be this world of becoming, this world of matter, shifting into all these different kinds of forms. And so eventually we'll move into a study of formal and final causality. But for right now, we just want to think about material and efficient causality. For the sake of knowledge, knowing the truth about being and beings. Aristotle writes in his Physics Book 2, quote, that knowledge is the object of our inquiry. And people do not think they know a thing till they have grasped the why of it, which is to grasp its primary cause. So to know a thing is to know its primary cause. This is why we need to take time to consider the variety of causes involved in every individual kind of being, including material beings. Knowledge is the basis of any and all science worthy of the name. The very word science comes from the Latin verb scire, which means to know, and then the Latin noun scientia, knowledge. So science conducts its procedures, processes, theories, hypotheses, experiments, conclusions. All the work of science is for the sake of knowing something better, more accurately, more precisely, more definitely. So the foundation of science, we see with Aristotle, is the question, why? This privileged scientific question, why? Why is this being what it is? Why is this process happening? Why is this movement happening? Why does this organism act toward this end? Why inquires into the origin, the Greek word arche, or cause, the Greek word aetion. That's where we get this word etiology, from the Greek word for cause, which is spelled different in the transliteration. Aetion, cause of an existent. Why does such and such exist? Why is such and such here? Why is the question asked not enough in our day? Yet for Aristotle, it is the premier question for the knowledge of any particular reality. Material causality inquires specifically about, quote, that out of which a thing comes to be and which persists in the material being. So Aristotle says that from which, as immanent material, a thing comes into being. That from which, that out of which a thing comes to be and which persists. That's the material cause, the out of which. Aristotle gives the example of a bronze statue originated from the copper alloy bronze. So it's a kind of tautology, material causality. It's saying what a thing is, that in so many ways it already was. It's just a transfer of the material elements from a previous position in the mass energy matrix to a new one, or a new participation in a different form of being than it was previously participating in. So when we're breathing the air, there's some oxygen molecules there that our body needs, and we breathe in those molecules, and the lungs are taking them in and integrating them within the citric acid cycle to make adenosine triphosphate, the energy molecules of the living organism. And this process where we have respiration is a constant metamorphosis of matter. The molecular composition of the atmosphere, the air, entering the living organism and undergoing a metamorphosis, participating in new forms, new molecules, according to a predetermined, rational purpose that promotes the life of the organism. So we're just tracing, again, the etiology from position A, position B, position C, and we're tracing, even thinking of the subatomic particles, their movement from here to there, one place to another, participating in one kind of molecular configuration and then another. Okay, and at a certain point, as what we know about matter, we can't even trace it anymore because it's morphing so rapidly, so quickly. And it's only in our theories that we present to ourselves these freeze frames of the atom, of the atomic nucleus, of the electrons. But in real time, in real life, everything is moving so rapidly. Everything is interacting with each other constantly. And we don't have, for very long, stable atomic identity, stable particle identity. There was a time that this particle was not participating in the form it is now, and shortly there will be a time it's moving on to something else. So there's a great ecosystem of material being, which is involved a constant moving one thing into another, a constant flow of becoming. And material causality is helping us to contemplate this constant flow of material becoming. And so when Aristotle thinks about the bronze statue originating from this copper alloy bronze that was there, not formed as a statue previously, but now participating in this form of the statue as it was mined, it was harvested, and now we have, it came from this geographical location, this geological layer, and now here it's participating in this artwork. Okay, we can trace the matter from there to here. The material statue was fashioned from already existing material. It wasn't that the sculptor produced the material to sculpt with. It was already there, but it's been moved, it's been transferred. Material causality simply recognizes that all material existence were derived from previously existing material existence. Then Edith Stein, in her work in the German language, refers to the material cause as voraus, that is, out of which. So it's a nice shorthand to think about the material cause voraus, out of which, voraus, a material, individual thing came into its own being, at least for a time, at least for a while. So this movement of matter from voraus to its present participation in a peculiar form is what we're thinking about with material cause of a thing. It's very straightforward. It's almost so straightforward, it's hard to see the before and after with it, because we imagine it so theoretically in these freeze frames that in themselves are not accurate to the actual flow of material being in itself that is so constant. So the material cause is that which is transformed. In other words, that out of which the new individual becomes, namely the matter. This Edith Stein writes in her book, Potency and Act. This is the most basic kind of cause, as it merely refers to that specific matter from which a particular material existence came to be. It designates the space-filling matter necessary for the new material being to materialize. And then in her book, Finite and Eternal Being, Stein refers to the example of the human being whose material cause is the material elements of which the body is formed. The hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, phosphorus, and so on, all the primary elements participating in these various molecules that make up the human body. We're saying the material cause, yes, is all these atoms, all these molecules, and they've been shaped, they've been changed, they've been reconfigured, but at least the genealogy forms a continuity of material being. Yeah, it is, and it's so interesting if we think about, if we isolate even one subatomic particle. When was the genesis of this particular proton? We can't even get at that because it's already morphed billions of times to be the proton it is right now for a little while until it's not that anymore. So in chemistry, we have no stable particles. There's no eternal particle. This is why materialism as a worldview makes no sense, at least on this score, that there is no immutable particle of matter. It's constantly morphing into energy. Every star is doing this. Every particle is subject to change, and in fact has changed billions of times over billions of years that the universe has been in existence. So if matter is defined by change, matter is potency. But potency has no being apart from act. And this is why we need to think with Aristotle about formal and final causality. That will take us back to the realm of spiritual being, the realm of act in relation to potency, because it makes no sense to say that this radical flux of matter itself is eternal, because there must be a cause standing outside of that flux for there to be the flux, for there to be the becoming. So material causality, even thinking about this, pondering this, it really humiliates our intellectual confidence about matter. When we really ponder matter, we discover it's almost a non-thing. There's no permanence about it. And yet we think matter is the most permanent thing there is. We build our skyscrapers, we build all these things, and we think as if it's been there for eternity. And in no way has it been there for eternity. And relative to eternity, it's a blip in temporality. This lamp, this body, these air molecules, whatever it is, it's defined by change. So material causality alone does not give us an adequate explanation in response to the why of a particular being. So this is the beauty of natural science, is it points us to a dilation beyond itself. This is the beauty of the liberal arts. All the fields of study are doing this, opening one into the other, into a great expansion toward philosophy and theology. At the start of the universities in medieval times, the queen of all sciences was called theology. And indeed, all this inquiry, all this investigation, this thinking about being leads us to those questions, which presuppose their answers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking them. So this is very exciting. Who knew that material causality could be so incredibly exciting? In her book, Finite and Eternal Being, reflecting on the human being, Edith Stein thinks about the material causes, the material elements of which the body is formed. Namely, the original gametes of the parents and the subsequent material elements, hydration, nutrition, eventually respiration. Well, respiration, first of all, through the mother's body, making its way through the umbilical cord to the infant. And we have this human organism growing, developing, this gestation. And all of these material components contribute to his or her successive physical growth, maturation. So at this point, well and good, but immediately the mind inquires about the causal agency of the being's becoming, and not only about its material makeup. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is at least some of this something material? Why are there all these different material bodies that fill Earth and the universe, but especially Earth? And so why all of this various kinds of material makeup? It's not enough just to talk about the matter moving from here to there or there to here. But we need to think about a larger scale of investigation beyond subatomic particles, beyond elements of the periodic table, beyond molecules that participate in this form or that form of material being. We need to think about efficient causality. What is efficient causality in relation to material causality? So for the next 20 minutes, I hope to at least get into efficient causality a bit and see what we learn there. So Aristotle defines efficient causality as the primary source of the change or rest in a being. The primary source of the change or rest in a being. And this he writes in his work called The Physics, again, book 2, but also in Metaphysics, book 5, where he writes that from which the change or the freedom from change first begins is the efficient cause. For example, the man who has deliberated is a cause, and the father a cause of the child, and the mother a cause of the child, and in general, the maker a cause of the thing made, and the change producing of the changing. We're getting here into a causal agency beyond pure potency. We're moving toward formal causality, but still enmeshed in the matrix of matter when we're thinking about efficient causality, at least if we're moving from material causality to efficient causality. We could think about efficient causality in the spiritual realm itself too, but just to think what we know best, what we know most obviously in terms of matter and efficient causality with matter. So efficient cause, the primary source of the change or rest in a being. Efficient causality refers to that which moves another in its being, causing the affected being to become in a new way. So again, we're moving from potency to act a bit more with efficient causality. So the out of which a thing comes is really thinking about the potency of those components that are involved in the composition of a material being. But what is the larger kind of causality, the more macro in relation to the micro? Why these hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen atoms are participating in this particular human body? Why are they participating in this body for now? How did this body itself come about? There was an act involved. In the case of the human being, there is an act involved in the genesis of this particular individual human being. And in our time, it could have been natural intercourse, or it could have been a natural in vitro fertilization procedure or something. And I'm not speaking about the morality of these things. I would point toward the Catholic teaching about all of these things, I think, which always is the truth about a matter. But in any case, a human being is conceived through an event of conception, an event either of sexual intercourse or some other artificial procedure in which a human being is conceived nevertheless, even outside the womb of the mother. But in either case, we have an act, an event that is the efficient cause of what the matter is doing and where it's going. What's happening with those parental reproductive cells? They are being brought together. And this act of the merging, the movement of the gametes, the reproductive cells, toward the zygote stage of development of the new human being, this process involves some kind of, at least for human beings, an intentional act that brings about the origin of the person. The new human being doesn't just happen spontaneously with the atoms, that there's some hydrogen and we mix with some nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and voila, a human being. But we have instead a careful genealogy of being that we have to trace through the efficient causes that result in this particular individual being, whether we're talking about biological kinds of being or, again, inanimate kinds of being. How did this particular rock get here, this particular grain of sand? There's an activity going on within the universe that brings about, yes, even this particular grain of sand. The waves, the water, in relation to the geological inanimate material, and eventually we get these grains of sand. So efficient causality is moving us closer to act, though not as definite as what we're going to get with formal and final causality. But with efficient causality, we have at least a bit more thinking about act. But I'll put it in brackets because it's always a proportionality of act, a proportionality that is going to move toward pure act, and I will talk about that in just a minute. But an efficient cause is not pure act. It is an admixture of act and potency, but nevertheless, at least some negligible contribution of an act as cause that is working to shape, to mold, to configure the material elements, the atomic particles at the micro level, to participate in this or that macro form of material being. So let's continue to think about efficient causality in relation to material causality. So for example, we could imagine a soccer ball soaring into the goal because a person kicked the ball, or perhaps the wind moved the ball, or the force of gravity propelled the ball downhill, etc. There's some efficient cause. There's a causal explanation as to how the ball got in the goal. There's a causal explanation that has to do with the efficient cause as to how that goal was manufactured in its different parts, how that ball was manufactured, how the game of soccer evolved into what it is today, or you say football in other countries. But these definite events that involve something of actual being already, but a determination of the particular material structure of this or that material being. We have to, again, assign responsibility and trace responsibility to the actual efficient causes involved in the production, or better, formation of a material thing. There's a series of efficient causes, one thing after another, and there's a chain of efficient causality that can't be broken in understanding a particular material thing, whether we're talking about a book, whether we're talking about a marker, any of these material objects. And now this is much easier to talk about material objects because nobody's going to dispute the reality that, yes, we have a material object here. You can touch it. We can dissect it chemically and all this. So efficient causality, like material causality, is a simple and straightforward type of causality. It examines a practical series of causes and effects over the course of linear chronological time. This is what we're doing so far. Material causality, efficient causality, the stuff of natural science, the stuff of mathematics. But mathematics goes farther than this. Efficient and material causality form the backbone of physics and therefore all other natural sciences, chemistry, biology, then engineering, technology. However, with efficient causality, we begin to spill over into the distinct fields of philosophy and theology already. Even with material causality, we're already pondering in these directions. For instance, we recognize the immediate absurdity of tracing the lineage of cause and effect into the past ad infinitum without a terminus we call the beginning. It's absurd to think in the beginning was no beginning, because that defies the very concept of cause. In the beginning, there is cause. There is that supreme act that is responsible for everything, for the something that is not nothing, and even for the subtle philosophical distinction between something and nothing which itself is something, in relation to the something that nothing is not. So we trace through efficient causality very quickly to an original cause, original causality of all of this series of secondary causes and effects that themselves are not the cause of themselves because they've changed. We can point to no cause in the material universe that itself is material, that upholds all of these material sequence of material events. The whole sequential matrix of mass energy that we might call a history. Nothing that is in the process of change can itself be the cause of that same change. Something else is acting on this particular material being to bring about its change. And we have a first, next, then, finally. And so metaphysics takes us to the first and the last, which form a unity that we call pure act. It is obvious to the sober intellect that a singular, original, uncaused cause must exist. And this is precisely the heart of St. Thomas Aquinas' argument in demonstrating the rational certainty of God's existence by observing God's effects, where he writes, quote, in his Summa Theologiae, Prima Pars, question 1, article 3, quote, something in process of change cannot itself cause that same change. It cannot change itself. It could not awaken itself into being. Necessarily, therefore, anything in process of change is changed by something else. So we are bound to arrive at some first cause of change, this primary cause, that is not itself changed by anything. And this is what everybody takes to be God. Even philosophically speaking, to say the word God is simply to posit this first cause of beings that is identical as first cause to being itself, not caused by anything else, but the sheer act of being that is distinct, entirely different and other than this matrix, this series of cause and effect that we call beings, very temporary beings becoming. This is to say that mutability, change, does not eternally proceed from mutability. The origin of change is that which is not subject to change, and at the same time, that which is delimited in no way, that which is infinite. Why is there something rather than nothing? It is because there is something in the first place, something that is not itself a thing among things. Not a thing among things, or even the sum total of all finite things, but that which is the source of everything else that is, this everything else that is not necessary to be. And how do we know it's not necessary to be? Because there was a time it was not. This and that being, there was a time it was not, there will be a time it will not be what it is as it is right now. In his second rational proof of God's existence, Thomas again appeals to efficient causality, quote, we find that there is an order of efficient causes in the observable world, yet we never observe nor ever could observe something efficiently causing itself. For this would mean that it preceded itself, which it cannot do. So there cannot be a last cause, nor an intermediate one, unless there is a first. It stands to reason. It simply stands to reason. I don't know how to get any more rational than this. The sober rationality of causality. I don't know how to get any more rational than that. There's a self-evidence about this causality that brings us to the first one itself not caused, of a different order of being that is necessary for there to be this mutable order of being, just barely being ordered out of the chaos it otherwise would drift back into. So we have to posit a first cause, which everyone calls God. And likewise, Thomas forcefully argues that among a contingent chronological series of causes and effects, we are confronted with the question of beginning. What is the first efficient cause? There must be one. That not efficiently caused by anything else. That which is not efficiently caused by anything else. The answer to this question is one of the key philosophical meanings of the term God. And so, even within the limited paradigm of natural scientific inquiry, we are brought to the limen between the natural and the supernatural through the medium of efficient causality. It's done that much. So in German, Edith Stein refers to the efficient cause as wodurch. Wodurch. So when she talks about material causes voraus, out of which, she calls efficient cause in German wodurch, which we could say through which. More specifically, the act, the event, the happening through which brought this material out of which into what it is now. Efficient cause, the through which this particular individual being came to be what it is now. For now. The event, the act through which brought it into being what it is now. Wodurch, through which. The efficient cause is that by which it is formed. The forming activity that here is the last cause that led up to this particular individual being's being. The most recent cause, the last cause responsible for this being here, being what it is. Yes, motion is understood according to efficient causality. What was moving that got this other thing moving? The laws of thermodynamics, this heat, this fluctuation of heat that brings about the movement. Why there is wind? Because of this fluctuation of temperature, of different proportions of heat. And molecules move because of the flux of temperature. Things like this, efficient causality, the last cause that led up to this current state of affairs. And of course, in a complex state of affairs, there's many causes contributing to this. This is why it's important to think philosophically, so we avoid various conspiracy theories and get fundamentalist about etiology. No, there's lots of causality happening that bring about a current state of affairs. There's lots of causalities happening, and Aristotle's giving us 4 that contribute to a particular being's being in a particular point, at a particular point of time. So, as the English word efficient suggests, from the Latin term efficere, to bring about, to cause, or to effect, to accomplish. It's so interesting in the English language how we can talk about, I can cause something or I can effect something as if I'm talking about the same thing. That's how integrally related cause and effect are. I can effect it. I can cause it. But it's thinking about efficient causality, that this efficient cause will bring about the effect. The effect that is determined by its prior cause. The effect is beholden to the cause that makes it effective, efficacious. So efficient causality especially refers to the causal agency within a process. And to say agency is from the Latin agere, to act. again, the eventfulness of being that is responsible for the diversification of beings, the fluctuation of beings, the mutability of beings, the metamorphosis of beings. We have matter that's involved, but matter is purely pliable. Matter is entirely passive. It doesn't care. It's pure susceptibility. And this is why matter is so beautiful, especially in relation to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And why would the word want to become flesh? Because matter says so much about spirit. Because matter is the perfect medium for spirit to act through, for this theodramatics to unfold. What's necessary on the part of the personal creature for salvation? Passivity in relation to the activity of God. It's paradoxical because it involves this intentional activity of the creature to say yes to the gift of salvation. But it's a paradox because at the height of the creaturely act becomes this radical surrender that could be described as a pure passivity in relation to divine act, the divine will, the divine plan. And matter already is telling us something about this theodrama, of which it has such a privileged role to play. And in Christianity, it's incredible because we could say matter, especially prime matter, theoretically, is the radical opposite of God, always through the analogy of being. If God is pure act, pure potency is this radical other or otherwise than divinity. And yet divinity in the Christian testimony unites itself with its radical opposite, its rather ontological other, matter. Pure spirit unites itself to pure potency, all the way through the suffering, death, crucifixion of God become human, who is Jesus. And that giving, that intentional giving oneself up to the point of abandonment is the supreme expression of love, of gift, of giving up, of, in Greek, the paradidomi, the traditioning of being. Giving up, giving over to the point of abandonment, handing oneself over, being handed over. So there's much to contemplate with matter. And one of my favorite chapters of the book, chapter 6, is all about material being, which I call in here the antinomy of spirit. It operates according to different laws than spiritual being, but always related to spiritual being. But now just to fill out, again, thinking about efficient causality. We ask, with the efficient cause of a thing, we ask the why about its being into what is doing the causing, whereas material causality only asks into the specific material being transformed in the process of change. The efficient cause is the most proximate cause that changes something other than itself. In finite and eternal being, Edith Stein refers to the example in the case of the human being whose efficient cause is the reproductive cells of the parents. And in the ancient world of Aristotle, they would talk about the semen because they didn't know about the ovum yet until around the year 1900. We didn't know about the contribution of the mother to the in terms of the reproductive cells, the contribution of the mother to the conception of a new human being. But in any case, yeah, the reproductive cells of the paternal and maternal organisms. This is just thinking natural science. But according to our current knowledge of microbiology, the efficient cause of a new human life is the mother and father who unite through the conjugal act. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there can be the case of in vitro conception or fertilization today. But in any case, there's an act happening in which a new human being is conceived through the zygotic union of the respective sexual gametes, something from man, something from woman, fused together. We have the zygote stage of development, the initial stage of the individual person, individual human being. So we're talking about the sexual act involving the mother and father cannot be separated entirely from divine efficient causal agency, because efficient causality causes some becoming, movement, or change. And again, to quote Edith Stein, when we think about these things, our own being is distended between finitude and infinity. Our own being is finite. I think this much is certain about our own being. But we think toward the infinite. The infinite can be thought in the finite mind, though of course it saturates the mind. But we have the concept. And so what happens as we contemplate material causality, efficient causality, we are led to this penetration to the idea of divine being. The first eternal infinite, the pure act, cannot remain absent from metaphysical thought. It shows up. What we mean by the infinite, the eternal infinite, the first cause, the pure act, divinity, this necessity of being itself is what we're brought to in this contemplation of causality. But efficient causality in itself, on a very basic level, causes some becoming, movement, or change. Efficient causality is the causality of motion. Edith Stein writes in Finite and Eternal Being, when matter is called a cause, the implicit meaning is that the thing as a whole could not be without matter, and that matter co-determines what the thing is. But it is not matter that gives the first impulse to the process of becoming. The process of becoming, is much wider than simply thinking about matter in itself. But we need to think about these various efficient impulses that bring about an event of becoming with all these different kinds of being. It's not just because the matter is there. Yes, there's these molecular polarities, even at the atomic level, the subatomic level, and the molecular level. There's all these potencies that we learn in chemistry. But the potencies themselves, are involved in the networks of configuration, molecular configuration. But the potencies themselves, the material potencies in themselves, don't explain the efficient causality responsible for the becoming of being in all of the micro and macro forms of being. That matter is involved is obvious, but there is an efficient causality that cannot be reduced simply to atomic, elemental, molecular polarities. There are events after all. There is a first, next, then, finally. And what efficient causality is doing is tracing this overall etiology, this overall history of being that looks at one impulse and then the next. Even within ourselves, even for those people who want to deny we have will and just say it's a material determinism of our acts, as if every act could be reduced to some molecular polarities that themselves. In any case, we have act, we have event, we have a causal agency, and it's not just simply being there. There is being there, but being actualized, being becoming, movement, change. So Stein says, unless some other principle were added, no new thing could ever originate from matter. It would just be there. It would just be what it is. There would be no drama. There would be no history. There would be no series of acts. In fact, thermal equilibrium would be being there. But we're not at thermal equilibrium, which means thermal equilibrium is not eternal. So this fact is expressed by stating that to matter is attributed only passive potency, not an active one. In metaphysics, when we think of material cause and the matter out of which a being comes to be, this is a passive potency and not an active potency, which we get with efficient causality. That is only the potency of suffering or receiving is matter, not the potency of doing or effecting anything by itself. To operate efficaciously or to give a first impulse to some operation or action is, however, precisely the function of efficient causality. To give a first impulse to some operation or action. And as human beings are doing this all the time. Yes, we do have will. We do have spiritual will, distinct from the material components of our bodies. And this is why we do this rather than that. This is why we decide. It really is on the order of self-evidence. It's on the order of self-evidence. And Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, so many philosophers always refer back to meaningful human acts, purposeful human acts. Like even when Aristotle's talking about material causality, he's still thinking about human acts to understand it best. The bronze, participating in the bronze statue that the human being makes, the artist makes, the poesis of being that we experience as human beings. We're involved in creating things. We're not just pure susceptibility to the forces of nature. We resist them. We harness them. We sail. We climb. We invent. We cook. We have culture. And all this evidence of spirit abounds. Okay, so eventually we're going to get to spiritual being, again with formal and final causality, but it's already showing up, it's already emergent in contemplating efficient causality. Efficient causality is the causality of motion. It's what initiates a process of change within a being other than its own. Thomas writes again that motion is the actuality of a being in potency. Motion is the actuality of a being in potency. Motion is due to efficient causality. Motion itself is the efficiency of cause. Efficient causality refers to the chain of motion by which one being already in motion moves another. Motion signifies that the potential of a being to move and or change has been actualized by a prior actualized being, by a prior motion to the motion just now effected, just now caused. Referring back to Thomas's rational proofs for God's existence, the logic of efficient causality identifies a prime mover that is itself unmoved by anything else. Divinity, being itself, pure act, inasmuch as nothing that is not actual can actualize. Nothing that is not already actual can actualize another. Efficient causality insists on a universal origin of motion and becoming that itself does not become, but simply is. So, what Aristotle is getting at, what Thomas Aquinas is getting at, what Edith Stein is getting at, there's being and becoming. This is the ontological difference. I talk about this in this book, Human and Divine Being. I talk about it in this book, Metaphysics, a basic introduction and a Christian key. There's ontological difference, and we can think this rationally. There are finite beings. There are beings on the way, beings that are becoming. And then there is being itself. There's existence. There's being itself that was before I am. There's being itself that remains the same after I die and you die. There's being itself. The being as act. Ipsum esse subsistens, in the language of Thomas Aquinas. Self-subsisting, being as act, being as verb, not just another noun of finite being that is becoming, that is moving between the no longer and the not yet. There was a time it was not. There will be a time to come. It will not be what it is now. This is the case with every material being in the universe. So there must be, factually, there must be being itself. There must be being as verb for there to be being as noun. What we mean in philosophy by God, by divinity, is being itself, pure act, the very actuality of being. The perfection of act is divinity. And there would be no approximations of being like ourselves if there wasn't first and always being itself, perfectly being. Rationality itself is based on these distinctions, based on these truths about being. If we can't, be on the same page rationally, we have no rationality to speak of. So this is essential. So just a few more points about efficient causality, maybe just a couple and wrap up this live stream. So efficient causality brings us to this prime mover that is itself unmoved by anything else. It may be better not, prime mover is so anthropomorphized, but prime movement, prime, we could say immobility, precisely because eternally mobile. Eternal mobility is at once eternal immobility. That is not being moved, not in motion, not moved by anything else, not part of this chain of efficient causality. But for that reason, the agency of all motion. So, inasmuch as nothing that is not actual can actualize, Efficient causality insists on a universal origin of motion and becoming that itself does not become but simply is. This origin is. This origin is to be. This origin is being itself, not one of many finite beings or even the sum total of all these finite beings in motion, but the motive actuality instigating all finite beings in their actuality and motion. Okay, so I'll stop here with this commentary from Human and Divine Being, and maybe just end with this thought about from a 2019 book on metaphysics about efficient causality. So again, related directly to the term effect in its etymology, efficere in Latin, to cause, to effect. Efficient cause refers to the most immediate and primary source of change or rest in a being. Efficient cause signifies the act or actual being that changes something else. It is motion or kinesis itself. It is force. It describes the presence of an actual being in act in relation to the latent potency of another actual being that undergoes change when its potency is actualized. In the most straightforward manner, efficient causality can be summed up thus: because of X, therefore Y. Efficient causality can be traced along a linear sequence of cause and effect measured by chronological time. We ask things like, why are there waves in the ocean? And we move to the efficient causality that produces the wave, the friction between wind currents, the movement of air molecules, the surface water and the surface water, as well as the gravitational force of both sun and moon in relation to Earth. Why is there wind and gravitational force? There's wind due to the uneven heating of the Earth's surface by the sun, causing temperature fluctuation that in turn causes expansion and movement, both vertical and horizontal, of air molecules. In addition, the rotation of the Earth on its axis further affects the atmospheric temperature changes, resulting in global wind patterns. Third, humidity levels affect wind by inhibiting it, high humidity, or not inhibiting it, low humidity. There's gravitational force because of the proximity between sun, earth, and moon, causing a mutual attraction of solar, planetary, lunar bodies that in turn result in the movement of earth and moon along their spatial orbits. Then we might ask, why is there gravitational force exerted between celestial bodies? And this question leads to complex concepts in physics and even different theories about gravity, whether understanding it as a physical force with Newton or as space-time curvature with Einstein. In any case, it is the local presence of these celestial bodies relatively near one another that generates an interaction productive of motion. Why does the sun emit light and heat? That is radiant and thermal energy. So all these interconnected questions about why are there waves in the ocean? Why does the sun emit light and heat, radiant and thermal energy? Because of the process of nuclear fusion taking place within the sun's core, in which hydrogen nuclei fuse to form helium nuclei and release gamma rays, photon particles. So perhaps you sense, like I do, that none of these answers are entirely satisfactory because we're moving from one stage of efficient causality to another. But we keep peeling back the onion, so to speak, to the most essential causal core of what's happening with being, what's happening with finite being. Each of these kind of questions could be phrased more precisely, just as each answer could be expanded to multi-volume length. Efficient causality inevitably adheres to the law of parsimony that contends that the most simple and straightforward answer is the best one because it is the most sufficient and to the point, even if a bit contrived and superficial. Efficient causality speaks to what was or what happened previously, but it does not answer why there is something rather than nothing, or why being events itself on macroscopic and microscopic scales. Why is there eternal act? And what precisely is the nature of this eternal act? Efficient causality itself, and neither material causality, they cannot answer such questions because these questions clearly transcend their scope of analysis. So we must leave it to the following two kinds of causality to think further, wider, deeper, to entertain questions dealing with cosmological origin and destiny. Cosmological origin and destiny of being and beings. So we will move to talk about formal and final causality next time. I thank you so much for joining me in this live stream. And we all continue to think toward the whole, to pray from the heart, and to live as a witness. We'll see you in the next one.